As everyone's joining, I just want to say hello. I want to give it a couple more minutes in case anyone's having any trouble logging into Zoom, and we'll get started really quickly here. I don't know how many of you have made popcorn, but you know, when you put the popcorn on and it's popping and popping and popping, and then right as it gets towards the end, you hear a few pops here and there. It's kind of how I see the attendee. We're just seeing a last couple here and there. So I think it's a good time for us to start. I want to welcome everyone to this technical assistance orientation. This is, for me personally, exciting because, I joined the City of Tucson Housing Community Development Department. It was a year in October. This is the first process that I've been able to participate in here with Tucson. I've done this in my previous position, and these are never easy processes to do. We have a lot of federal funds, but they're never enough for the actual need. And so it's always tough decisions that have to be made. And I just want to encourage all of you to put forward your best proposal. We know that all of you are doing very important work, and I appreciate everything that you do. Please know that we've just went through a long process. I should say it wasn't long, it was arduous process for our new plan. We used to have a human services plan that outlined our process. We now have what's called the PCHIP, which stands for People, Communities, Investment, and Housing. So I'll let Ann give you the right acronym because I just messed it up. But for short, we go with PCHIP. And our PCHIP plan outlines a lot of information about our community, the challenges that we face, and more importantly, how we can strategize to meet some of those needs. And there are priorities as well. What are some of the things that the mayor and council, who oversees the general funds and also our federal funds, what are things that are very important based on what they're working on and what they see are the needs of the community. So if you haven't seen the PCHIP plan, and we'll hear a little bit more about it here shortly, please look at that document, make references to the document, use data to back up the needs that you're showing. We really want everyone to have the best proposal and make our decision even harder, right? So we have a committee of people that will be including community members, mayor and council staff, some technical expert type staff from HCD and Pima County. We want this to be a very transparent and fair process. We've shared as much information as possible so that you're aware of what we'll be evaluating. But I want you to know that we're with you as partners to want to address some of the biggest needs in our community, whether it's homelessness, housing, or services for our vulnerable populations. So thank you for taking the time today to come listen, to participate, and we are always open to feedback. But I want to give a big kudos and a big thank you to all the staff that have worked on this process. I can tell you it takes a lot of man hours, women hours, a lot of hands to get this work done. And it's all with the intention to meet as many needs as we can with the funds that we've been given. So I think I can turn it over now to Ann Chineka, who will actually say what PCHIP is correctly. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Liz, and I agree. A big thank you to staff that put a lot of time and energy into getting things together for the call for projects. So Liz was correct. It's the People, Communities, and Homes Investment Plan. And I think Jody's going to put up a presentation that we're going to go through today and kind of walk through what the technical assistance is going to look like today. A few things on PCHIP. When I started, so I'm pretty new to HCD. I started in June and it's been really exciting for me learning all of the facets of the department in terms of really impressed with all of the work that HCD does. And so one of the tasks that Liz asked me to oversee is this update to the Human Services Plan. And the task that we were given based on input from mayor and council when we updated the housing and the consolidated plan, a requirement from Housing and Urban Development, was to have the plan be data driven, have it be, make sure that HCD has more transparency in terms of the funding we receive and we allocate, and really think through accountability of those funds. So those were kind of the key drivers of the plan. And so with that, we're going to do just a brief overview. Let's go to the next slide, Jody.
Sorry, I'm having trouble going to the next slide. I'm not sure what's going on. Just a second.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so right now, what we're doing today is I'm providing the overview of PCHIP and what we've heard from Mayor and Council in terms of priorities moving forward. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jody and others to talk more about the call for projects specifically. They'll talk about next steps in the timeline. There'll be a little bit of assistance and overview of ZoomGrants, and then we'll have some time for questions. So moving on. So people, communities, and homes. I would say Liz is correct in that it felt like a long process, but this plan was recently adopted by Mayor and Council a couple of weeks ago. The whole idea of the plan is thinking through having it be a roadmap for housing and community development for moving into the future. And so one of the terms we used a lot throughout the plan was investing in Tucson's infrastructure of opportunity. And so really thinking about those three areas: people, which is really looking at how do we support low income, marginalized populations? How do we support individuals and families? The second piece, communities, is really focused on how do we support our nonprofit communities, neighborhoods, and really that greater social context that supports the individuals and families. And the last piece, homes, I don't have to tell all of you that thinking about the importance of having shelter and that being a starting point to move from. And so the plan really uses those three areas, people, communities, and homes, as the framework for moving forward. There is a ton of data in the plan. The plan ended up being far longer than we anticipated it would be, but as Liz mentioned, while you're developing your proposals for the call for projects, I highly recommend looking at the current conditions and challenges section, because there's a lot of helpful data in that section. So we did a lot of community engagement, well, based on what we could do during COVID, that went into the plan, including a budget tool, including a survey. Putting that all together, we got to the slide that you're seeing now, the PCHIP priority areas. So there's a whole section on that outlines the priorities and goals, but then this is a snapshot of what we heard summarized from the data from Mayor and Council, and also through the community input on what people felt like were the most important areas that HCD should focus on putting our resources. And all of that's outlined in the call for projects as well as the PCHIP plan. And so, and this is also built into the PCHIP plan, but we did think it was important. Ultimately, it is mayor and council who decide where HCD's funding goes, and they make the decisions on the budget. So we felt like it's important to highlight what we've been hearing in terms of the key priorities. So none of these are surprising probably to anybody. It's things that mayor and council have been saying for a while now. But really here is a bulleted list of areas that mayor and council have asked that we focus our attention on. So also really recommend when you're developing your proposals to think about how to address these key areas. And then the final slide that I wanted to talk about today, when we were developing PCHIP, at various points, we talked about having funding available for people, communities, and homes. One thing I really wanted to point out today is that with this current call for projects, we're really focusing on the people piece, which is what traditionally has been our human services. And so want to be clear that for the funding that PCHIP outlines under communities and homes, we anticipate those are separate funding processes that will come, but it's not part of this current call for projects. So this is an outline of what is part of the current call for projects. There is the general fund dollars that we've traditionally had to go towards human services. There's also the ESG funding, and Jody and Jason can talk more about that. But then the community development block grant funding that is also for public services, and then the housing opportunities for persons with AIDS or HOPWA funding. So again, if you're looking at PCHIP, we're really focusing on the people side in this call for projects. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Jody to provide more information here.
Thanks, Ann. Thank you, Ann. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We're excited to share information about our call for projects. You may know that this is for the upcoming fiscal year, which will start July of 2021 and go through June of 22. We will be posting this webinar afterwards with the link on both the City of Tucson Housing and Community Development website, as well as the PCHIP site. Many of you have gotten funding from the City of Tucson in the past. We want to thank you for your hard work and your successes. One of the significant changes in this call for projects is that we are including the HOPWA program, and we also have different priorities. If you have questions at the end, I'm going to share the emails for our staff, and I'll introduce the staff that will be available to help you. So as Ann said, the available amount of general funds which come from the City of Tucson is $1,400,000. The funds are allocated for the priorities in PCHIP. And the proposals, we're asking you to either reduce homelessness, and then you can follow the list. I don't want to read all of this to you, but these are the key things that your proposals should address. Okay, I'm going to start with the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. Just to clarify, general funds are City of Tucson funds, and they are a little broader in their definitions and have fewer regulations for anybody that's new. Emergency Solutions and CDBG are HUD allocations that the City of Tucson receives. So if you're applying for these funds, you need to make sure that you review the regulations and that what you're proposing fits in the eligible activities. ESG, you have to have 100% matching funds. Your subrecipients our subrecipients have to participate in HMIS. There are minimum habitability standards. Mainly that's for rapid rehousing. You have to coordinate with the continuum of care, also known as TPCH. You need to make sure that you follow the written standards, both for TPCH and the ESG performance standards. And then you need to follow the 3 next things. Eligible activities can include essential services, which might be case management, childcare, legal services. With ESG, you can apply for shelter operations, financial assistance, rental assistance, or service costs. And we've included the two of the links. If you go to the HUD Exchange, you can look at what's eligible as well as also getting a quick reference. Under CDBG, there is $740,417 available. This is only for public services. Again, this money comes from HUD and it's capped. Our entire allocation that we get from HUD is capped at 15% of that can be used for public services. One of the most important things about CDBG is that anything you're proposing has to meet one of the 3 national objectives. It has to principally benefit low and moderate income persons, aid in the prevention of elimination of slums or blight, and address an urgent community need. And again, the 2 links are listed here. Some of the examples of CDBG are services for homeless persons, services for senior citizens, childcare, recreational programs. And again, one of the more important things about CDBG is that it must be for a new service or a quantifiable increase in the level of an existing service. I think one of the things that we haven't addressed, and you may have a question about, is if you have a project that qualifies under CDBG and ESG, do you need to do 2 separate proposals? You don't. You can do 1 proposal, but you need to make sure that it fits the criteria for both ESG and CDBG. And as our committees review the proposals, if you've applied for ESG and we're out of ESG funding, but they really want to see it funded, then it might be funded under CDBG, which is a little looser. So if you can meet the criteria in both CDBG and ESG, I think that you're going to have a better chance of success. Then we're taking applications for the HOPWA program. This is new. In past years, we've done a set aside for an agency, and this year we are asking anyone that's interested to apply. It's one of the requirements of HUD that we do a fair, competitive process for applications. HOPWA was established to provide housing assistance and supportive services for medically diagnosed low-income persons living with HIV/AIDS and their families. That is the only population that HOPWA can serve. If you want to serve other populations, you are not able to do that with HOPWA. The federal regulations for HOPWA can be found at 24 CFR Part 574. And here's a screenshot of looking at it. All of the project applications for any of these funding sources are going to be submitted online. Most of you are familiar with ZoomGrants. You may have applied in the past with the city or with the county. It's the same software, but you do have to have a different login for the city than for the county. And we will provide staff to help you with that if you struggle with it. Please note that hard copies, applications that are sent through email or late submittals are not accepted. The ZoomGrants date stamps everything that comes in. So you're going to want to make sure that you leave plenty of time to submit your application. This is the rating. This is how we're going to be rating proposals. I am not going to go through all these, but this is also saved in ZoomGrants. And if you want to have your proposal score high, you want to make sure that it meets these criteria. And there are a lot of criteria, but the committees that are scoring your application are going to be rating each of these categories in your application. So if you can address, the more you can address, the better off you should score. This is the remainder of the rating tool. One of the more important things, well, there's a couple of really important things. One is that, and I think I skipped over this in the first screen, but you need to make sure that you give us 3 very specific, well-defined performance outcomes. In the past, we've done that when we go through the scope of work with your agency, but that is one of the screening, or it's one of the rating criteria this time. So please spend some time developing those. And then the city has, more so even in the last few years than prior, is prioritizing housing first, low barrier shelter. And we're looking at whether there are true preconditions to sheltering somebody or housing them. So is your agency set up to be flexible related to pets, the households, couples, singles, single dads with kids, sobriety, and whether you require persons to participate in service or services? And then also, again, importantly, excuse me, is it aligned with the highest priorities for PCHIP? I think one of the things I meant to mention is that all of the things that are referred to in the proposal, there is a library in ZoomGrants, and that actually may be in one of my next slides, but there's a library where you can access all these documents. So you can access PCHIP, you can access the choice neighborhoods, as well as the CDBG target area and priority areas. So next step, please go into ZoomGrants, register first, get your login, and then read and review the online instructions. Make sure that you answer all the questions. Again, there are the measurable performance outcomes. We also will be listing updates and frequently asked questions on the PCHIP website. And you can, this is the link to both the PCHIP website as well as the Housing and Community Development process or website. So each project requires a separate application. The deadline, February 28th, 2021, before midnight. Again, they're automatically dated and time-stamped. We recommend that you start early so you allow plenty of time in case there's glitches with the software or questions. We found the software to be very reliable, but that doesn't mean something can't happen. Make sure you read the federal regulations for what's eligible under the funding source. Ensure that what you're proposing is a PCHIP priority, and email us if you have questions. And we've divided up the different funding sources for different staff that can help you. So we'll provide that again at the end. Just to give you a heads up, we've had people in the past, agencies that only had one person preparing the grant and then something happened to that person and there was no one that could submit. So make sure you have at least 2 persons that have access to ZoomGrants. This is the timeline. You know, starting with when you submit your proposal at whatever time that is, the city staff will review it to make sure it's eligible. And I think one of the things I missed is there is a pre-application and an application different from other fund sources. You will move right from the pre-application into the application, but you have to submit everything in the pre-application to be able to move on. So just assume that you've done don't assume, but once you've done the pre-application, just know that you can go right into the regular application. So we'll start reviewing proposals as soon as they're submitted. And until you submit, you can continue to make changes. Everything is saved all the way through. The deadline, again, is February 28th. The committees will be meeting March 10th and 11th to review the proposals. And then they'll make their recommendations by March 12th to our director. She'll review the recommendations and submit them to mayor and council. March 23rd, there's a study session. March 24th, the public comment opens. And then there's a public meeting on April 1st. It's not April Fool's, it really is happening then at 3 p.m. and we'll be advertising that. I'm sure that it will be on Zoom as well. April 16th, the legal ad is published for the recommendations. There's one more public hearing on May 4th, and then we submit the annual action plan to HUD, and the funding year begins July 1st. So with ZoomGrants, it is user-friendly. We talked about the pre-application. It saves the data as you go through, so you can work on it over the entire month. No papers required. There is a ZoomGrants University, so there's a lot of helpful articles and information there. So you might want to check that before you ask staff. There's also YouTube videos. I don't think you'll need them, but they're there if you do. And then you can also follow our website and the PCHIP site. There's also a how-to guide in ZoomGrants for applicants and tips on submitting your applications. And under Zoom, this is just an example of the ZoomGrants University. For example, how can you verify that your application was submitted? You can verify that the timestamp and that it was received, and you will receive an email back that you have submitted it. Before I do questions, I just want to introduce the staff that will be available to assist you. So I'll come back to questions in just a moment. So Glenn Moyer is our administrator. I'm not sure if he's on the call. Are you here, Glenn? Doesn't look like it. Okay, we're going to go on to Latifa. I don't know if you can show your video to introduce yourself. Latifa handles CDBG and general funds. She's a project coordinator and she'll be working on your contracts and your payment requests. Some of you may already know her. Our next project coordinator is Thelma Magalenis, and she handles ESG and HOPWA. If you have questions about those, please email her. Melissa Scaff is handling some of our ESG, mainly the pandemic funds, but she also is assisting Thelma with ESG, so she's learning it, and then handles our COC program, so she'll be assisting as well.
Jody, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. I'm on my work computer and I'm having difficulties. So I'm here though, sorry.
Great, thank you, Latifa, no problem. Technology is our friend when it works, right? Okay. And then I'll move on to Elaine Raviel. Elaine has retired from the city, but we've been able to twist her arm to come back and help us with the call for projects. As I'm sure all of you are, our staff is stretched really thin, and hopefully everybody will stay in and be healthy. But if you email and you haven't had a response in a couple of days, feel free to email Elaine or myself. But if you would start with Latifa and Thelma, if it pertains to that particular fund source. But we are here to serve you as well. So I'm going to go back to questions.
All right, Jody, this is Jason. There are a few questions in the question and answer box, and so I can read those to you. And then just put it in the chat box if folks have questions, if you could either put them into the question and answer box. And I know sometimes that's less familiar for folks. So if you're unfamiliar with how to use that, you can also use the raise hand feature, and then we will unmute you to ask your question. So the first question, would the University of Arizona and/or Arizona State University be eligible to apply for this funding?
That's a good question. We are funding nonprofits. So if there's an arm of one of those, one of the universities that's a nonprofit, yes, you could apply. Other than that, I don't believe that you can, but I will clarify that.
Thank you. And the next question asks, when will the housing and community focused grant opportunities be coming out? And I believe this is probably a response to Anne earlier mentioning that this grant cycle is largely the people portion of the P-CHIP.
Yeah, thanks, Jason, and thanks for the question. And good question. So home funding, we are looking at that closely. There is a process currently to apply for home funding year round. We're really looking at that and analyzing that. And we anticipate to have information on that relatively soon. We don't have a timeline yet, but we'll continue to keep everybody updated as we find that out. In terms of the funding for neighborhoods and community facilities, that's something that we are looking closely at what mayor and council are doing with the idea of having a using the participatory budget tool this budget cycle to identify funding for different wards and different communities. So we are not going to make a decision regarding that funding until we see what happens at the mayor and council level, because we want to make sure that the funding is available depending on what that process, what unfolds from that process. So based on the budget cycle, we anticipate we'll know more what that looks like come March, April timeframe. But we want to make sure that we have enough funding to commit. So we didn't want to release that funding just yet.
Thank you. And the next question, is there a limit on how much government funding an applying organization can have? So I imagine that's, is there a limit on the amount of funding that an organization can apply for?
That's a good question. There is not. I think in previous years we've defined that. There is a minimum, and I believe that I neglected to say that, but we would like you to not apply for less than 50,000. We do try to fund as many agencies and priorities as possible. So if you submit a proposal for $1 million, I can pretty much promise you it's not going to get funded. So be reasonable. We know there's a lot of need out there, and apply for what you can. And if you're in doubt, send us a question or give us a call. Any other questions?
Yep, we still have a few in. So
Okay.
The next question, what is the allowable rate for indirect or overhead expenses?
The city asks that you keep it to 20%. How, I don't know, Jason, if you want to help me with that question. To put you on the spot, sorry.
Sure. So my understanding is that for general funds, we do a 20% administrative cap. For federal funding, the indirect costs are eligible based on federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreements. If an organization does not have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, then we would apply, if the organization has never had a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, then the 10% de minimis indirect cost rate applies. If an organization has had a federally negotiated indirect cost rate in the past but does not currently, then the city will negotiate an indirect cost rate agreement with you not to exceed 20%.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Then the next question is I don't see the question is I don't see the general fund section, which is what is usually used to apply under. Is that this one? And so I think probably what that question might mean is because general funds are included in this application as an application area. And so historically this would have been called the Human Services grant cycle. And Nikki, who asked this question, if that's kind of what you meant there, is it not seeing kind of human services funding showing up somewhere as language? It's a relanguaging of this opportunity. If that doesn't answer your question, please go ahead and raise your hand. We'll unmute you so that you can ask that question. Then the next question, does the pre-app need to be approved before moving to the application? Is there a different deadline for the pre-application, or can the pre-application and application be submitted simultaneously by February 28th?
It is submitted simultaneously and it does not need to be approved. So you fill out your pre-app and then go right into the application. So you do submit them all at the same time. And the pre-application can't be submitted unless you have included all the documents. So if you've included all the documents, you can submit your pre-app and you go right into the application. So you won't be waiting for approval from anyone.
So those are the end of the questions that are submitted in the question and answer feature. In looking through the participants list, I don't see any hands raised. So maybe we give just another moment in case anyone has questions that have shown up, to either throw those in the Q&A or raise your hand. And another question has come in. So to clarify, if you have a login for ZoomGrants for another agency, do you still need to create a new login for this call for proposals?
I don't think so. Elaine, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Your agency would have your login information and you would go ahead and submit for your agency for this opportunity. I hope that answers it.
So I think the question is just if, so say as an organization, I'm just going to use an example here. I receive funding through Pima County, and Pima County also uses ZoomGrants. So I have login credentials that I've used for Pima County in the past. Do I need to create a separate login to be able to submit an application for the City of Tucson opportunity, or can I use the same ZoomGrants credentials? Like, does that one account apply to multiple funding sources?
You do have to create another account. So you have to give us a different email address. Some people might use their personal one or they set up another one, but you cannot use the same one for the city and county. Good question.
I believe that is the end of the questions.
Okay, again, this will be posted. We thank you all for joining and wish you the best of luck in preparing your applications. Again, the emails are listed on both the PCHIP site, the HCD site, and please contact Latifa or Thelma or Melissa as a backup if you have questions. And also Elaine and I are available to answer questions as well. I appreciate you all joining us. I wish you, I see one more question.
Thank you, and my apologies, Marissa, you sent this question earlier and I somehow missed it in my go through. So there was a question regarding the rating tool, and there are 5 points assigned to the rating tool for housing projects being using housing first or low barrier shelter, depending on the model of housing that it's providing. And so the question is, if a project is not a housing project, how are those 5 points treated in the evaluation of that project?
Again, that's a good question. I think that we probably would make those 5 points. We would pull those out for anything that's not housing or shelter related.
And there to mean that it would be pulled out from the total number of points available, as well as from the scoring, so that it's neither positive or negative to not be a housing program.
I would think that should be how it would be handled. Yes.
I believe that is the end then.
We're here to help you. We're available. Again, like all of you, we are stretched thin, so please be patient with us. Give us a chance to answer, and I wish you the best luck and start early. Thank you so much.